Hello, everyone, and welcome to a special episode of the SWW show. I'm Mike, and this here is Adrian. Adrian,
Hi.
you and I met last year at GDC, and you showed me. We'll say this game looked completely different when I first saw it.
Yeah, it really did.
So make sure I say the name correctly. So, what is the name of your game, and what is your elevator pitch of it? Let's start there.
Okay, so the name of the game is Obversion, and I can go into a whole side tangent as to what that word literally means and what it kind of more specifically means to me. The game itself, it's a first-person puzzle platform, or platformer, has very strong themes of duality and kind of like philosophy quotes peppered in everywhere. Definitely has some like anti-chamber or portal vibes just because it's a first-person puzzle game and there's not a whole lot of those, which is very much one of the reasons I made it. It's like there's kind of a gap in that space, and like most of my favorite puzzle games have been first-person puzzle games, and I'm just like you can count on one hand the number of like really good ones. So yeah, that's Obversion. If you want to practice saying that.
Yeah, Obversion.
And one thing I did know when I chose the name, like, this might not be the like easiest to pronounce name, but I'm hoping because it's so like phonetic, like it's a name that people will remember just by sight. Because most people consume games not by talking about them, but by like reading them on the internet and stuff like that.
Yeah, especially so like when I started seeing it, it was a duality at the time, which isn't
Yeah.
It's a word I at least inherently understand. But now I'm like, whenever you see this, I'm always like, ooh, what is that? Okay, so its foundation, it's a first-person puzzle game, and you're some capacity collecting or interacting with the cubes and blocks in the environment.
Yeah. So it's all kind of Minecraft-style cubes on a lattice system, except it's a puzzle game. So the core mechanics are you have creation and destruction. So back to the duality theme, you can either create a colored cube. They're colored and like they can change colors from world to world. So in the first world, they're all gold, for instance. And you separately have a completely separate budget to destroy colored cubes. And like that's the kind of fundamental tension that I think is missing from some other voxel cube placement games, which is surprising to say that there are actually more than a few that do that. Anti-chamber is a great example of that, where there's some stuff that you can just completely break in anti-chamber by just like collecting a whole bunch of cubes and then being able to take them back.
So you're trying to tell us immediately right now we cannot break your game. So I'm going to put you to your word on that one.
No, well, hopefully if you break my game, it's designed to be broken in a fun way. So I tried to go for a like more systematic approach. And like one of the things that's nice about having that creation and destruction being separate is that it allowed me to compose the environment of only two types of cubes, again, circling back to duality. Like interactable, the colored ones, and non-interactable, the black ones. And that allows for a lot more like choice space and like tends to have more surprise solutions and kind of like lateral thinking type puzzles, which I really enjoy.
Yeah, so like every time I've seen it, which is I find very interesting too, even it's I like how you have this like it's very simple to understand. Like I've relatively a couple things I can do. But then what you just give it is because you give it in quantity in that capacity is what makes it hard. It's not because the actions themselves are hard.
Yeah, and then it's all up to level design to kind of like, push you in the right directions or provide red herrings or like all of that is just like entirely in level design. And I did a lot of stuff where I like tried to abstract basically a different puzzle using these very simple core mechanics. And there's some added mechanics in later levels that kind of really help me do that. But even all those added mechanics are like, it's very minimalist and like pretty much the added mechanics just enhance the existing mechanics and like kind of strengthen their connections. So I'll give an example, like the World 3 mechanic just switches your creation budget with your destruction budget. And as simple as that sounds, it really allowed me to do a couple completely different level types.
Which is very interesting, because I think that was always when I was talking to you about it, that was one where my brain started breaking sometimes of like, especially because if I remember right, I think there's some version of it where like it lost one in translation. I'm always like, okay, is it worth it?
Yeah.
So that's, I think,
sorry.
No, you're good. I'm saying I find that very interesting, and I also appreciate, too, how you understood foundationally the idea of, like, when you lose or die, you should be able to restart immediately, not like with some games where it's like, oh, I have to wait the 30 seconds. You understood that at a core level of, like, it has to be immediate.
Yeah, so that's like a whole separate pillar that I like to talk about, which is I like to think of it as removing the execution skill as much as possible, and definitely, like, not letting the player explore and not punishing them for anything if I can help it. So you've got the undo system, which I haven't to this date seen any kind of continuous game with this type of undo system. It really just like everything that changes the world, which can include like jumping off like from a high level that you can't just jump back. It just adds to the undo stack, and you can undo all the way back to the beginning, redo again for duality. Like I might not have included redo if it wasn't the initial duality theme.
Which is funny, because I'm curious, because from a programming point of view, I assume once you have undo, redo is a very simple tool to add.
You'd be surprised how many extra bugs were introduced with redo.
Really?
Yeah, so I gave an example of an interesting one. So the game itself has kind of a maximum fall height of 10 cubes, and there's quite a few levels that depend on this. So it's not just, like, naturally, so to give a little more context, all the levels are kind of diorama style where they're just sitting in the middle of nowhere. And, you know, when you fall off the edge into nothing, you just zoom right back to where you jumped from. Which is not uncommon in games, but yeah, kind of what you mentioned about not punishing the user and just like, because, you know, there's some games that would like restart from the beginning and it's like, well, that's not very fun. But yeah, so the interesting bug was if someone undid in the middle of a fall and then redid, it would reset the kind of height that I was calculating, that maximum fall height, to wherever they were when they redid again.
Oh no.
And so you could basically fall infinitely far if you were just like constantly toggling them and completely broke some levels. So there was some nuance to doing redo that's surprising.
So, like, that's a fine example of that I didn't think of, or even just logistically, there's always the infamous thing to, like, if you use rigid bodies in Unity of, like, momentum likes to just stay. No matter where I hit the guy and I tell it to stop, momentum is just like, no, I'm still running.
Yeah.
So, I'm curious, because I've seen kind of the back end of your iteration of this game, too. What is, because you've gone through a lot of versions of this game at this point, what was, like, one of the toughest things that you think you've wrapped your head around now, but like through development, that was just like the hardest nut to crack?
I would say like the visuals, basically. So, I mean, you mentioned it looks totally different. So the game used to be black and white, because I was really sticking to this duality theme. I was sticking to it a little too strongly, which is why. So it was black and white, and then I just got so much feedback that it just looked too gray, and I'm like, okay. There's a couple different ways I could do this. I could go even more black and white, because there's quite a few games that do that, because I was going grayscale versus true black and white. But I'm like, okay, what if I do color? Because, like, people are saying color. I know, like, you know, in a store page, color pops a lot better. And, like, some of my like side art in the past has involved color, so it's not like I was averse to color in general. And that was an interesting experience because like I just started doing a couple things with shaders and a whole bunch of stuff. So it was really making that decision was hard. Once I did the first few iterations on color, a whole bunch of stuff just started falling in place. So like I changed the name to Obversion. Obversion, for whatever, made me think of this kind of font, which made me think of kind of a slightly Art Deco inspired theming. So a lot of the accents have these like very vague Art Deco feel to it, even though overall it's this kind of trippy minimalist aesthetic. And yeah, so just like convincing myself that I could do this level of like interesting art, and like for me the real unlock was really understanding shaders, because I've only been at video game development for, I don't know, I say 5 quarters. So, and I didn't even start doing shaders until, I don't know, maybe March or April. But I have this very strong math background, and I've done a lot of stuff with kind of like pixel manipulation. So the idea of how shaders work was extremely intuitive for me. So, like that's really my home turf now.
I'm also going to say the thing that's going to anger a lot of people. I'm not convinced foundationally shaders are hard to implement. It's when you do like really neat things with them is when they get complicated. But like people make it sound like a shader by itself is super complicated, and you're like, no, it's
absolutely
not.
Well, I think the thing with shaders is like, I mean, excluding something like shader graph, but like I think shaders, just the way they're presented is a little intimidating to people. Because it's just like, well, now you're switching to a much lower level style, because it's kind of C style, even though it's not. It's, you know, whatever. I guess Unity is using some version of CG.
But yeah, but it totally is. You open this up and you're like, this is not C#. This is not what I was writing.
Yeah, and the other issue with shaders and like kind of graphics cards is like they kind of embed their whole history in them with some of the boilerplate. You're like, what's a surface shader versus a vertex fragment shader? It's like, there's just like a whole like space that you have to wrap your head around that is not presented in the most, like, I don't want to say intuitive, but like friendly way. But I mean, thankfully for me with my like programming and math background, like that was not an issue. But yeah, no, I think for sure, especially surface shaders, because like you can do a lot of interesting stuff. And yeah, that's not, and it's like all the lighting models just handled for you.
See, I always find the example when I say like how powerful shaders are in foundationally is they always talk about, so like Fortnite, all of the building animations are just shaders.
Oh yeah.
Which is like which on paper people just go, what? Like.
Yeah, that's the sort of stuff I want to be messing with more.
But that's the
because like almost everything, almost all the interesting stuff for me is in the fragment shader, but doing stuff with vertex shaders, I think.
But again, that's the type of shader work where you're like, nope, that's going to take me like 20 years to master and like a PhD.
Yeah.
But okay, so back to Obversion then. So another thing that I think that I found interesting is, so we talked about before how like one of the reasons I think the game gets complicated, and that's the fun puzzle part, is the size of the levels and the size of the options presented to the player.
Yep.
How did you find that balance? Because you totally have this thing, every time I've seen it, where it's like some levels within like a range, but it's very interesting you have like a decent size variation pending the level.
Yeah, so I would say, for one, there's kind of a size constraint based on the way I present the levels. So, I mean, I know you knew this, but the level select quote-unquote screen is just viewing the level from the outside using an orthographic projection camera. It's isometric. It's an easy way to think about it for those that don't know the term orthographic projection. And that camera doesn't like change size, so that kind of sets a maximum level size. And then kind of as far as minimum level, like you can't go that small and still have an interesting level. So I feel like that's honestly most of how level size, at least unconsciously, was set.
So
other than that, I think like it was just when I was like brainstorming levels, I would start with a high level idea, and some of those high level ideas just happen to be smaller.
So inherently, then, so it's kind of like you cared more of the size of it than I'd say the time of completion for the level. in a lot of ways.
But I definitely was opting for a lot of kind of variation in experience between levels. So it's naturally going to have different times. And like some people might spend a lot of time on a level that other people get quickly because it might be one of those levels that has a lot more of an epiphany moment. And therefore some people will just get it fast and some people won't. And then there's other levels that are a little more like you have to be very detail-oriented and efficient. And those levels tend to be a little bit bigger, and like often you just can't complete them that fast, no matter what.
And then I'm always like, and I assume you in some capacity is tracking this. I'm always curious to see like if you see this interesting thing of if a player like the thing with games with progression when you go like World 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever. If it's balanced correctly and you have the right player in the mindset, in theory, actually their times shouldn't be going up because it's the next world. Because as the challenge gets harder, so should their knowledge, understanding, and of your thought processes. They should understand better.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I even agree with that much. It depends on the game.
Okay.
Because sometimes you have to imagine also what's growing with the player is their ability. It's almost like endurance with experience in a game. This is maybe less so with puzzle games, but like imagine like a Zachtronics game, like those levels definitely get longer even if you're getting better.
Right.
So sometimes it's more just like the skills that the player is improving can just be like holding more in their head and therefore being able to deal with levels that necessarily take longer. I think with Obversion, I was kind of opting less for like a smooth difficulty increase and more for, kind of a wild sawtooth that just has like a very different experiences that just tends to get harder over time.
I was about to say, it's much more of a roller coaster of like, you could be like, oh, here's the nice calm world, and then also like the peak comes back up again.
Yeah, for sure. Like the main thing was like, I try to make sure like the very first world is always on the easier side. Like the last world is the only one where that might not quite be the case, but it's the last world, so I feel like that's acceptable. But yeah, it's interesting. Like I think because of that approach to level design, where I was really just like each level has its own high level thing and like should look unique and interesting from the outside, which is kind of dictated by that level select quote unquote screen that I described. That, I almost doesn't need to, like, test the smooth ramp, except for the very first few levels.
Because all you really care about is they have a learning mechanic, and then from there, it's as it goes.
Yeah, and from there, it's just, like, having an interesting experience. Because, like, you can imagine, like, if you're playing multiple puzzle games, like, you don't mind if one puzzle game is maybe a little easier than another puzzle game as long as it's significantly different and interesting.
And as long as you are taught the mechanic or being taught the mechanic to solve said puzzle.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. I guess that's interesting because it inherently, because of that, a problem that is a problem in a lot of games just kind of got solved for you by the nature of how you made this game.
Yeah. And it was like kind of accidental, like both intentional and accidental at the same time, which is in a sense how I really like to design stuff in general. So like start with some really core principles, and then all sorts of unexpected nice things fall out of it.
And also you get to just sound like a genius when you go, yes, I planned it this way.
I did. I planned the ability to have it happen on accident.
Right, but like, no, when people go, they go, see, it just feels natural. You're like, yes, I understood psychology, the curve, you make up some fake paper, it's great.
Yeah.
Nice. Well, Adrian, thanks for talking to me about Obversion. Is there anything else that you feel like we missed or you want to talk about relating to the game?
Yeah, there's one little thing that I was thinking of besides, launch date and stuff, which I should mention. Just circling back to the kind of try to remove execution skill, the auto jump was another big thing.
Yeah, that was a discussion I remember when we were having, when you kind of added in there, and it's like, it's one of those that like, you almost feel like, I remember I was like, this didn't feel needed, and then all of a sudden you get used to it, you're like, oh, it moves the, like, you all of a sudden you're like, you can't mess it up now.
Yeah, and I was like, I very much wanted to remove the skill necessary to, 'cause, like, it's difficult to design puzzles that don't happen to involve, like, very close to optimal jumps.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just like, well, I'll just give the player the ability to perform optimal jumps every time. Then on top of that, you know, the induce system kind of like fills in all the other gaps when you mess up even with that. And at first I was thinking I couldn't think of any other games that had it, but then I played Wind Waker. I'm like, oh yeah, all the old Zelda games technically have that.
I was gonna say, a lot of old games that, like, when they're learning 3D have a surprising amount of some level of auto jump or whatever. Like, that's Pokemon. When you're at the end of a cliff, it just jumps you. Because they're like, we're not gonna have you click a button. It doesn't matter. That's not what the point of this game is.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so yeah, tell us, when does the game come out? How much is it? Where can we find it?
Yeah, so the game is coming out January 28th. Or depending on whether or not when this airs, may have come out January 28th.
No, this will air, so this should be airing, if I did my job correctly, on the 17th. So it'll be about a week and a half.
Okay. And you can get it on Steam. What was the other question? I already missed one.
How much is it?
How much it? So I'm going to sell it for $9.99.
$9.99, and just Steam, no itch, none of the other fun places?
Yeah, none of the other fun places for now. Just kind of sticking with the big one where most people are, and then depending on traction, I might open up to some other platforms.
And then what you have to do, because everyone has to ask this question legally now, is you contact Nintendo of America, get yourself one of those Switch kits, and just see how that works out.
Yep.
Nice. Well, thanks, Adrian, for sitting down and talking about this. Whenever I've poked at it, the game's always at least been interesting to fun, pending my frustration with the game.
Yeah, it's definitely on, I mean, especially getting all the collectible yin-yangs, it's very much on the hard side.
But yeah, I'm excited that you finally have this game out for that way, like, because it's one of those, it's like, I wonder how long this could take, because remember when we talked, you already been a couple months in, so at least you get to have this in some capacity more in the public, and seeing how I'm curious to see how the feedback's going to become and all that fun stuff.
Yeah, it's going to be super exciting, publishing the first game. Oof. Yeah.
Well, again, thank you, and everyone have a good day.
Yeah, thanks.
This podcast was a product of the SWW Show. You can find more at the SWWshow.com or Facebook.com/the SWW Store or Twitter.com/SWW. You can find out more about Mike at Mikey_Maroney on Twitter, and more about AJ at Losivor on Twitter. Remember, new episodes come out twice a month, one focusing on the new entertainment news and one focusing on Movie Club, so new and an old movie. You can find out more again at the SWWshow.com, and you can find the show on podcast services around the globe.